Yes, and those are good points. And the framework of this issue is not to discuss these risks, but equally to give you some ideas about how to address them in the way you might contract for these capabilities. But there's another dimension as well, and I think Erik alluded to it, but many people have built up rather substantial capabilities in their RMIS applications. And I'd like Erik to go through the basic issue of ownership of the data, and then in the next slide we'll talk a little bit about the applications that you may be developing on the cloud and how those are controlled.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, so around ownership, I mean, it's more of, I would say, a kind of a legal contractual issue that that needs to be addressed directly with the cloud provider that you may work with. But as a customer, from a viewpoint of a customer, you probably want to have the ability to control, to access, to reacquire any data that is delivered to a cloud provider. So you want to have good control of that information, just as you would if you had it within your own infrastructure and within your own data center. So I think the bottom line is you should work closely with your legal department and within your company to discuss these issues and really understand and be clear on what you're getting with regards to data ownership.
And then, Erik, I just brought up the next slide dealing with other applications that people probably are currently putting into their RMIS in special fields and maybe allocation rules and all kinds of calculations. How are those line up with the capabilities of a cloud application?
Yeah, so all the items that you noted, fields and business rules, as a business, you may move, your platform or your information into the cloud, and really you'll operate just as you would if you operated within your own environment. Again, subject to the arrangement that you have set up with the cloud provider, including compute and usage restrictions. The environment would be consistent with kind of your in-house operation, with editing and revising and making updates, and some of that, like I noted, would be based on the contractual agreement that you have with the cloud provider, but there is a lot of flexibility.
All right, well, let's move along to a question for Yasha. You already alluded about the criticality of the Internet. I would like you to comment on that and perhaps describe what options a cloud user might have if the Internet is down.
All right. Well, you've got two separate issues here. One issue is what is provided at the remote site. And in the model you introduced very early, Rick, think about that as a mainframe computer and the mainframe store somewhere else, and you have to access it. So you have one basically has what I'll call three options. One is the regular public Internet with whatever your ISP and service provides, whatever quality of service you've purchased, whatever you have. The second one is what's called a virtual private network, where you will set up from your site to the remote site what appears to you to be at least a private network that you're directly sitting on their network. You're still subject to certain outages across the Internet and connection. And the third one that almost guarantees that you'll stay up, that is to say the connection will stay up and that no one will be accessing your line or your data as it's connected, is what is generically called a leased line, where effectively from your telephone or network provider, you have what amounts to a direct cable from your place to wherever the remote site says that they're starting. Now, the only issue with any of these is once you're on that remote site, does that remote site then use other connections to get to even further remote sites where they'll be using the public Internet? But again, you've got those three options.
This reminds me of an old story of a very successful vacuum cleaner salesman who used to travel in the rural parts of the U.S., and his technique was always the same. If he could get the lady of the house to open the door. He could get his foot in that door and then dump a cup full of dirt right in the center of just there inside of their house. And his story was, "Don't worry, ma'am, I'll be able to clean this up better than it was before. And if I don't, I'll eat it." So on one of these occasions, the lady then turned and quickly started to walk away, and he asked her where she was going, and she replied she was getting him a spoon because they had no electricity. Anyway, that's where we are with some of these dependencies on the Internet. Erik, I think as buyers, we're more concerned about getting some protections. Can you talk about uptime performance guarantees and perhaps other terms that buyers should be looking for in their contracts with cloud providers?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So a cloud provider may offer a service agreement that identifies certain performance metrics that they must meet as they provision these services. And I would say that, as you compare across the service providers, this would be maybe a good indication of kind of where the or how the service provider feels with regards to their service and how confident they are in the ability to procure those services on a ongoing basis. So I think that's it's an important part, and I can't tell you exactly what the uptime requirement should be, but again, in looking across the service providers, I think you'll find some comparisons and begin to understand how the providers are looking at their business. Some of the other terms that you want to contemplate, at least from a risk management perspective, would include the basic items such as looking at indemnities and identifying insurance that may be appropriate in this area, warranties. And again, all these areas that we've discussed here, should be reviewed in conjunction with not only from a risk management perspective, but also from a legal perspective in your legal department.
Actually, Erik, I will underline the legal side of this because it's changing, and there are a growing number of statutes relating to aspects of this. And in fact, the next question raises perhaps the most visible issue in cloud computing, data security and privacy. So, Yasha, I'd like you to address this and perhaps come up with some practical advice as to how people balance these risks against the benefits.
Well, part of the balance has to do, as Erik mentioned, what is in the legal contracts. And part of that balance also has to do with, as a customer, as a consumer of cloud computing, how well you believe or can ascertain that the vendor will actually be able to meet, the cloud computing vendor will meet what is in the contract. There are a whole many different ways the cloud provider can satisfy this, the need that's mentioned. And I don't think we have time here to go into every single one of them. You mentioned encryption. Encryption is one of the standard techniques that people use, and it is relatively secure. Every time you give your credit card information, for example, through a browser, if you look at the very top, you'll probably see the HTTP colon thing that you see at the top change to an HTTPS colon, which is an encrypted channel and has a fair amount of security. But going back to your traveling salesman model, I'll do a similar model with encryption. Encryption, in some sense, is like putting your information, your data, your valuables in a safe. It can be a safe at the bank. It can be a safe in your office. If somebody else has that combination, surprise, your safe is open. Or if somebody comes in who's a very good safe cracker, surprise, your safe is open. So there are issues there. It's not ironclad, and certainly the things you want to look at are the legal contracts, and particularly if your data is going internationally, even though you've contracted within a single nation state, cloud computing often may end up with resources outside your nation state, what happens in that particular case. That's not to panic anyone, but merely to be certain, or as be as certain as you can in advance, of what you're actually being provisioned and what, if any, warranties, indemnifications, etc., come with that provisioning. Does that sort of address what you're going after?
Yes, I think that's excellent. But as an attorney and one who doesn't work in this area exclusively by any means, but the two issues about encryption that I think the audience would be very wise to become familiar with, because the bad guys out there that are looking for opportunities to take data and sell it or in some way take advantage of it are going to be deterred. They're going to go with the easiest source. And so steps like encryption could differentiate you and put you a little away from the pack and make you a more difficult target, even though, as Yasha says, it's not ironclad. And the second issue, which perhaps you should talk with your legal people about, is that there is a growing number of safe harbor requirements or allowances, so that if you've taken the effort to take these steps, and encryption is one of them, then even if your data are compromised, you have defenses that you otherwise would not have. And we'll get into this in a minute, but most of the states, I think 46 out of the 50, and Lord knows how many federal, now have rules relating to privacy and requirements and penalties for disclosure. So it's not an academic issue. So Erik, on this same area, how do you believe the security and privacy of cloud compares to what is done in the more traditional RMIS environment?
Yeah, I would say, Rick, cloud computing, it's created a heightened awareness around, certain risks such as security, privacy, data integrity. All these areas, again, should be reviewed, to determine, by a company if those cloud services should be leveraged and which provider may be the best fit. And at the end of the day, what type of data and information, a customer should be sending up into the cloud.
I think it's interesting, Erik, that you've mentioned this a couple of times of kind of a tiered approach to putting data on the cloud, so that it may be quite appropriate for data that's considered not to be that confidential or private, and yet you're still retaining control and more careful restrictions on data that might raise personal privacy issues. Let me move along then to a broader issue of security. Erik, in terms of demonstrating capabilities, does SAS Type 70 level something that the cloud vendors should be demonstrating?
Yeah, I think for SAS 70, I think it is important. Really the SAS 70 is a confirmation of the commitment the hosting company has with regards to data reliability and integrity. I think it would be one of the boxes to check when looking at a cloud provider to determine hey, do they have the SAS 70? Are they compliant? Are they becoming compliant with their services? Again, this environment, these businesses are changing quite quickly, and again, it would be one of the components and one of the check boxes to say, yeah, this company, they're trying to do the right thing.
Are you aware of anything beyond SAS 70 that as a consumer that they might be looking for?
There are new certifications in new areas, from a compliance standpoint that companies will need to adhere to, both on the domestic side and also moving out into the international realm. And again, I think the key thing is to understand, across the different service providers, how they're staying compliant with these items, and make your decision based on those levels.